It's an epic poem.
About, like, goblins and minotaurs and such.
Wrong on both counts.
Is that not Homer's Odyssey? What one's that?
Goblins! Rusty Quill presents Enthusiasm. Hello, friends and fans, and welcome to Enthusiasm, the show where we talk about a few of our favourite things. I am your host, Helen Gould, one of the best Rusty Quillers, and today we're talking about fantasy books. And I am...
Bejeweled?
Ooh, bewitched.
Bewitched. Better.
To be joined by Cole, Josh, and Tim. So, as always, we shall introduce ourselves alphabetically, which means that Cole, you are starting today. So, can you give us your pronouns and tell us what you do?
My name is Cole. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the creator and narrator of The Town Whispers.
Fantastic. And how's The Town Whispers going for you?
Town Whispers is fantastic. I absolutely love being on the RQ network and meeting folks like you, Helen.
Aw, I didn't, that was a genuine question. I didn't intend for that to be an advertise how much you like us, but you gave us that anyway, and I appreciate it.
But specifically, only Helen. Everyone else.
Yeah, we've got issues with that Tim guy, but you, Helen.
Yeah.
You. I've made it onto Enthusiasm.
Yes, you have. Very happy to have you. Next up, Josh, can you give us your pronouns and tell us what you do?
Hello, I'm Josh Fox, pronouns he, him. I am the designer of tabletop role-playing games such as Lovecraft-esque, Flotsam, Adrift Amongst the Stars, and Last Fleet.
So, Tim, come on, what are your pronouns and what do you do?
Come on, Tim, what are your pronouns?
Come on,
love.
Tim.
My name's Tim, I'm he, him, and I am best known on the Rusty Quill network as being Drexel in Stellar Firma, but that series is over now, so now I'm just sort of hanging around and stealing sandwiches from tables.
So that's where they've all been going.
Prawn cocktail.
Well then, I'm going to start us off with a very simple question, which is essentially, what is a fantasy book? What makes a book part of the fantasy genre? Does it need to have magic in it, or to have had magic in it at some point? Does it need to have lots of world building? Does it need to be a trilogy? Does it need to have certain narrative and character tropes? I would like to hear any and all thoughts on this point.
It's a big opening question. What is fantasy?
I know! These things,
Could you make a relatively strong argument that basically fantasy books is, when you start to write myths down and folklore down, that's, you're basically there. Like if you start writing down folk stories about stuff that is fantastical and, warnings about stuff and, yeah, all that stuff, if you start writing, is The Odyssey by Homer a fantasy book? I say yes. Fight me in the street if you say no.
I shall fight you in the streets next time I'm in Brighton, because that's not a fantasy book.
In what way?
It's an epic poem
about like goblins and minotaurs and such. So
wrong on both counts.
Is that not Homer's Odyssey? What one's that?
Goblins!
Not goblins. Goblins was a poor choice of words. A giant brass man with a heel you shoot. That's not real. Fantasy, I say.
The Odyssey is the one with the Cyclops.
Yeah.
And with the witch that turns everyone into pigs.
So I think it depends on whether Homer thought that the things he was writing about were real or not.
Very good point. Yes.
So is fantasy by definition fictional?
Yes.
I think it doesn't count as fantasy unless you are including elements that are not thought to be part of the natural world.
So was what Homer was doing just bad journalism?
Maybe. I mean, you'd have to ask him, wouldn't you?
And he won't answer his mail.
No, it's got no second name, that's why.
Yeah, you just mail it to Homer, the ancient world, and it doesn't get there.
Cole, what do you think?
Yeah, maybe I'm just being really basic here, but I think fantasy is just like any time that you can build a portal to another world and provide that escapism for someone. I do agree with Tim, though. The Odyssey is fantasy.
Yes.
You're both incorrect.
Oh.
Listen, if
sorry.
Minotaurs and house hippos, those are the two things I want more than anything to be real in the world, but neither are.
Okay, somebody's going to have to explain to me what a house hippo is, because that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Canadians will get it. So in the 90s, we had all these wonderful PSAs on TV, and one of them was the house hippo. And it had the opposite effect, because every kid would watch the whole PSA, be like, house hippos, the North American house hippo, and they go hunting through their house for the house hippo, and they didn't listen to the last bit, which was like, it said something to the effect of, don't believe everything you see on TV, right? And it wasn't until like years later. Yeah. And it wasn't until years later that everyone was like, oh, dang, I shouldn't have listened to everything I saw on TV. And so we all got left with like this empty pit in our hearts about the loss of this North American house hippo.
It's like the American heffalump.
Kinda. But tiny and in your house, like little mouse holes.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Again, Minotaurs and house hippos, neither of those are in the Odyssey either.
And no Minotaurs in the Odyssey.
I thought there was. I've never read the Odyssey. I'm a terrible human being.
No, you're thinking
That
of
big maze.
Theseus.
Yeah, what's his face? You know, old King what's his face?
Was there a Minotaur in Beowulf?
I was about to say Theseus wasn't a king, but he did become a king later on. But this is not... We've already done the mythology episode. We're done. It's fine.
We're not allowed to talk about it.
We're all exposing our lack of a classical education.
Oh, no. I'm a fraud.
Oh, no.
This is why mother puts me in the cupboard.
The shame covered.
The shame cupboard. Yes, I'll be better, mama.
For the audience, you weren't here for that. Cole is currently recording it from inside a cupboard.
It's the best way.
For the glorious audio quality that I am sure you are currently experiencing. Touch wood. So, a book is a fantasy book when it makes use of the imagination and is about other worlds, then.
I would just maybe refine it a bit, because like the point of naming a genre is to help people to find fiction that they're going to enjoy, right? Mm-hmm. So while I would have no issue at all with somebody who, say, likes, I don't know, vampire erotica, calling that a fantasy book, right? In more ways than one. But I think that would be confusing for a lot of people if you labelled it as such. So that it's kind of... I think subgenres are quite helpful here because it helps people to really zero in on the kind of thing that they really want. Heroic fantasy will be interesting to some people and not others. Urban fantasy, completely different cup of tea. And if you just said, oh, this is fantasy, you may get a pleasant surprise or an unpleasant surprise, depending.
Okay, so urban fantasy is like you're in like a city and there are weird wizards on the corner and pixies in the drains and things like that.
With the risk of just getting even deeper into definitions, I think urban fantasy is like you're in a real life city and around the corner is weird shit.
Would Artemis Fowl count that way? Because that's sort of like, it's largely set in Earth and Dublin, but also there are leprechauns and there's people killing each other with magic. So that's sort of set in the quote-unquote real world, but it's also got a fantasy element. I think that ends up getting counted as like young adult, which is a lovely term for, I don't know, this. But like there's not active sex happening on the page. That's basically the only no-no. Other than that, just do what you want. Put it in the YA section. My favourite section.
So what do you think? Artemis Fowl?
I don't actually know Artemis Fowl that well, so I would hesitate to opine. But I think inclusive genre categories are a good thing generally, so probably, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if fantasy, like all these genres, I mean, because there is so much overlap between genres, like sci-fi and fantasy in most bookstores are just kind of lumped into the same section and then just kind of curtail from one to the other. Maybe they're just defined by the tropes they use, and the only difference between something like Artemis Fowl and Lord of the Rings is kind of the tropes that are employed to tell the story or the viewpoint or the emphasis. Whereas the emphasis in Artemis Fowl isn't necessarily on like this fantastical adventure in a new world. It's more focused on space leprechauns who become cops.
Well, it's a crime. It's basically it's a crime story. It's about his kidnap.
It's like a heist story, right?
Yeah, well, one of them's a heist. The Eternity Code, I think, is a heist. The first one's basically a kidnap story. It's all very gritty, but in a YA sense, which means it's not actually that gritty. But occasionally, someone gets shot. But yeah, I'd agree. Because, yeah, a fantasy book tends to rely on some sort of epic quest of some kind.
That's the problem, I think. If you start to rely on tropes, then you do start to exclude things
that would
on the basis of
yeah.
it's not quite Tolkien enough.
And much as I love Lord of the Rings, as everyone knows, I love Lord of the Rings, but
Ditto.
we should not model everything on what Tolkien did. Absolutely not.
There should be a map at the start of every book and histories.
No.
Who begat them, I say?
And family trees at the back.
Yeah.
No, I love all these things. I'm the bad person in this call. I love staring at those little maps
I do like
with
a map.
my entire heart and soul, and lore fuels me.
No,
Absolutely love it.
Well, my issue is that I don't care about the maps until I've read the book.
I mean, fair, yeah.
It is a puzzler that they put them at the beginning, isn't it? You're looking at them going, well, this is great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what to make of it yet.
Yeah, this means nothing to me.
what's this Shire thing of which they speak? Let's find out. Page 1.
And they kind of have spoilers in them too, right? Where they're like, the great fissure. And you're like, something bad happened in the middle of this map. The great fissuring. Oh.
I do like the idea that there's a map and there's like, here's the bit where Frodo puts the ring in the volcano. Oh, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have looked at the key.
Known ring locations and the little legend beside.
Quest markers. This is where Gimli and Legolas become mates. Oh, I spoiled that too.
Lord of the Rings with the new comprehensive map.
You got to put a content warning on this podcast for anyone who hasn't read it.
I mean, come on. You don't have to have read any of it, and somebody has yelled the plot to you out of a passing car at this stage.
It's true.
It's basically impossible.
Also, my policy as well that we don't give spoiler warnings for anything that's older than 10 years old, because come on.
Come on.
Otherwise, it will just all the show notes will just be lists of spoiler warnings.
It's difficult on a pop culture podcast. These.
It is, but that's my rule, and I'm sticking to it. Josh, you looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, it's quite interesting. A lot of fantasy books contain monsters that are objectively quite horrific. I mean, just thinking about things like the Ring Wraiths, quite scary.
Shelob?
Yeah.
And yet, the point isn't really to be horrified, or at least the point of the whole book isn't. You know, it's the book is about overcoming evil rather than being the victim of it. And that's a distinction I would maybe make. Although I'm generally in favour of a kind of a Venn diagram of genres. I reject the idea of separating fantasy from horror. But
Yes.
But even so.
So maybe one of the distinctive things that separates fantasy and horror is that fantasy is about overcoming the scary thing, and horror is about exploring and possibly being victimized by the scary thing.
Yeah, a horror book rarely is and then we got it.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes, yeah, but only after most of everyone else has been got.
Yeah.
And then probably after we think we've got it,
we ain't got it.
Secretly, it's still there.
Yeah.
Is it that there's not a lot of books where they kind of beat the evil monster or whatever it may be at the end of the book, or the fact that horror is a genre, just there's still uncertainty no matter what, and you're not safe as you are in other genres? Because I can think of a lot of books where they do get the monster at the end eventually, but there's always the uncertainty of what if?
Yeah, you got this one. But who's to say there's not more?
You're never sure if it's going to be a happy ending.
And you don't come away feeling empowered and safe.
No.
You feel like, wow, we only just did that, and actually I just want to go away and cry for a bit.
And you just put down the book, tears streaming down your face, and go, I think I'll read another. Hooray! Hooray for this genre.
I love horror.
I have done that before.
I don't know if a book ever made me properly... You know what? I've just suddenly got... You remember the Darren Chan books? The Vampire's Apprentice?
Oh, so good.
Yes, I remember the Darren Chan
so
books.
Cirque du Freak. Oh,
Yes.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
good.
Because that's a young adult fantasy horror, I suppose you could call it.
Yeah.
Urban fantasy.
I remember there's a bit in that, and the kind of the saddest, most horrible bit, I think, is later when he tries to drink the blood of a sheep because he doesn't want to drink human blood, and he doesn't do it right, and the animal's sort of sad and dying, and he's like, oh God. And I remember that being this is the saddest thing that's happened in this book that contains a lot of murder, because the sheep doesn't get it. The sheep's just I want to be your mate. Oh, what are you doing? Now I'm done. It's bad, but it's weird that often in things like horror, the most horrible thing isn't necessarily the goriest, most intensely violent thing.
Yeah.
It's the little things and like the destruction of innocence and things like that are actually much more upsetting, because it's almost like it's ultra violence. It's like it's violence to the point of it being silly. You know, like specifically what do they call them? Not slasher flicks, but like those really intentionally splatter flicks.
Yes.
They're like, the point is this is not how this works, and this is really just over the top gory. And then you have stuff that has like the small stuff that really upsets you, and then maybe in the middle. So I'm just moving on to films. I'm so sorry. Like Hellraiser in the middle, where it's sort of like,
no, Hellraiser was a story first. It's all right. It's a book.
oh, there you go. I can get away with it. Hellraiser, the book, which I've read. I love the actors in the book Hellraiser, where it's sort of like, it's sort of in between of like lots of gore, lots of violence, but it's all very much people being like, I didn't want this, I didn't mean this. And I'm like going, it doesn't matter that you didn't want this. It's happening now. Go. Sorry, bleep that. But that is very much Pinhead's vibe. It's like, oi, ding dong, you shouldn't have opened the box. Anyway, come to hell, you know.
Can we go back to Darren Chan for a second? Because I think you mentioned the moment with the sheep. The whole Darren Chan series got me emotional from start to finish. And you read those books, and like, even as a kid, you read those books in like 4 to 8 hours each, and they're super digestible. But the ending. Can we just have a moment of silent recognition for the conclusion?
I don't know if I got to the end of it. How did it go?
I never got to the end.
Oh my gosh. Because it goes horror, fantasy, kind of that urban fantasy thing with the vampires. And then you get a bit of a sci-fi twist in it. I'm not going to say anything if you guys haven't read it. It is, the ending shattered me as a 12-year-old. Absolutely killed me. Because once again, you kind of get to that thing where it's like, oh, do you actually win? And then you kind of start seeing like the whole series is about like consequence and actions, right? And like fate almost, which is very interesting because you also get that in fantasy, but the books are kind of YA horror. And then you also kind of get like this how fate works in a practical sense with like multiverses, which goes into sci-fi.
Yeah.
So if you haven't finished Darren Chan, I would highly suggest doing so.
Because it was one of those definitely one of those ones where I enjoyed them, but there were so many of them, and it was before I was really, and unfortunately, the absolute freight train that was the tens and tens of Terry Pratchett books really juggernauted its way through my young adult reading life, and there's just so many of them. So I think I got like 5 books in, and then didn't read the rest. But maybe I should go back.
I don't know. Don't take it from me. It's really good though.
Whoa! You were suggesting it so hard. You were like, "This is the one thing you should do before you die," and then all of a sudden on a dime, when I was like, "Yeah, I should do that," you were like, "Whoa! You know, actually."
This is why Mother put me in the cupboard for my unwarranted opinions. Read Darren Chan, Mama.
On that note, we're going to take a little break, and we'll be back after these ads. And welcome back. So we have thoroughly debated what makes fantasy, and now we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty. I would like to talk about the first fantasy books we remember reading, because the first one I tried to read was Gormenghast.
Ooh, tough start.
I was too young for it. I bounced off that like a brick wall, could not get into that.
It is dense.
And then I was reading, I think, the Darkest Rising series after that. What about the rest of you? What did you read first?
I've got 2 answers to this, and it depends on what you define as a fantasy book.
Give me them both, and then I'll tell you if you're right or not.
Because of the fact that it is definitely not reporting the facts, would Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas be a fantasy book? Because he's definitely having a fantasy.
How old were you when you read that?
I was very young, because my parents had a copy, and I picked it up. And I asked my dad, why would somebody soak a carpet with ether? And he knew something was up. He was like, what? Why? Hey, buddy boy. When you, where did you hear that? It's like, it's book. What book? Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Oh, interesting. Could I see that? And then the book was gone. So...
Throw that in outer space.
Yeah. So, but if that's not counted, then it would be Terry Pratchett, and it would be The Hogfather, and I bounced off of that.
Oh, really?
I did not like. I read a bit of it and was like, meh, I don't know about this, and then didn't read it, and then came back with Guards, and then read the whole shebang from start to finish. So yeah, it was a Terry Pratchett start, but with a false start.
Oh, that's nice though that you read them all afterwards.
Yeah, and I still haven't that. I still have a bit of a thing against The Hogfather, because I remember it being like, what's this? I don't get it. It's stupid. Tiatame? What's this? Get away from me. And then it was Vimes, and I was like, yes, I'm in.
Josh, what about you?
The first fantasy novel that I can distinctly remember reading is Elric of Melnibane by Michael Moorcock.
Oh, what's that about? I've not heard of it, actually.
Oh, it's part of the Eternal Champion series, which is an extremely expansive series, which, like, the metaphysic is that theoretically all of the main characters in these books are basically the same character, incarnated differently in some different part of the multiverse. I'm not sure if Moorcock might have been the first person to mess around with multiverse ideas in fantasy books. Anyway, Elric of Melnibane was sort of conceived as a sort of polar opposite to Conan the Barbarian, which was going around at the time. So he's this kind of weedy sorcerer character who calls on dark gods to aid him against the baddies in the book, and ends up with getting a demon sword that eats souls, and so it's all kind of metal fantasy. I guess it's like the early incarnation of fantasy as metal cover. It's all kind of full of, Games Workshop's for Powers of Chaos. It's essentially all based on the kind of ripped off from Michael Moorcock. So it's full of kind of weird, gribbly chaos gods and things, and the battle between law and chaos is central to it. It's great.
Because I always thought Moorcock was more... Because my exclusive exposure to Moorcock is, again, we had some of the books, and if you went hunting through them, there might be a lady on the front of one of them not wearing any clothes. Oh. And when you're 14, it's like, cha-ching, pay dirt. And so I think it was literally like Lesbian Lovers Through Time, like, was one of the... There's definitely one of those sort of things. And I always thought Moorcock was sort of all of that, like, pulp sci-fi stuff. I didn't realise it was also metal fantasy.
Oh, it's super pulp. I mean, it's total trash, really. I mean, well, it is. I mean, it's very.
You can love trash.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I'm reading some of his stuff to my kid right now, which is probably very ill-judged. I'm having to edit out quite a lot of rape and whatnot, torture.
And then hang on, no, most of this page is bad. Hang on, that page is bad. Okay, here we are. Afterwards, on you go.
Redacted.
No, I just sort of, you just edit out the odd subclause of a sentence, and it mostly still makes sense. It's fine. He doesn't know. He doesn't realise I'm doing it, I'm sure.
My dad used to deliberately replace words in the fairy tales for me so that I would yell at him. He would say things like, once upon a time, there was a lovely turnip. And I'd say, it wasn't a turnip, it was a princess. And he'd be like, no, it says turnip.
Sorry, it says turnip.
Oh, I do that for my daughter. I read her the Wincess and the Prison, and she has to shout, it's not the Wincess and the Prison, it's the Princess and the Wizard, Daddy. And yet I still do it every time for some reason.
It's because it's fun to wind up your kids.
Yeah. Why have them if you can't lie to them?
It's a great way to get them engaged, too.
Cole, what was the first fantasy book you read?
Oh, man. Everyone has such niche picks here. I'm trying to figure out, because the beginning of my fantasy adventure was kind of like a mishmash all at the same time because I got over enthusiastic.
Ooh.
So I want to say it was The Hobbit, but then I also can't remember if I read Philosopher's Stone before The Hobbit, and I think I did. So I'm trying to remember if it was Harry Potter, The Hobbit, or A Wizard of Earthsea.
It's a good set.
The Ursula Le Guin? Is that her?
Ursula K. Le Guin, yeah.
Ursula Le Guin, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think I started off with Harry Potter because I was like that cool kid with the uncle who was traveling in Europe, and then I got sent a package from England, and I got all like the English versions of the book.
I see.
So I had Philosopher's Stone, or not the Sorcerer's Stone, and all that stuff. And then, while I was waiting for the fourth book to come out, Goblet of Fire, I think I went on a tear through like the entire Diana Wynne Jones Christomancy series, A Wizard of Earthsea. Terry Goodkind was a really bad call. Shouldn't have gone there. I don't really like Redacted. Yeah, so I think it was, a tear through all those books. It was all a mishmash, but I think Harry Potter was the first one. I
just had a sort of memory that I read, I think it was called The Wind Singer.
Oh my God, The Wind Singer. I've gone wrong, Tess. I've gone wrong. What? There's a bit in The Wind Singer where like he gets like his body is cursed or like his mind is taken, and he just turns to his sister and yells, I've gone wrong. And me and my brother used to yell that at each other. The Wind Singer. I haven't thought about that in years.
Neither have I. I don't remember anything about it apart from maybe there was a girl in a carriage.
Yeah, and it's all about like people in like a class system, a colour-based, a colour-coded class system.
Yeah.
Who can imagine such a thing? Yeah, it's all, and there's these big wind towers that need to be reactivated to save the world or something. But yeah, they are weird. Those were weird books.
That's awesome.
Wow, that sounds like a precursor to Red Rising.
Oh, yes. I only recently listened to Red Rising.
Very good.
Yeah, it gets very...
But that color-based like
the reds and
system
such.
in society, yeah.
Yeah. No, that was a good one. Who's that by?
Pierce Brown.
Yeah.
Red Rising.
They're
So good.
They are good.
My next question, again, a very simple question. What do you think makes a good fantasy book? Because I'm sure we've all read bad ones that shall remain nameless. But what makes a fantasy book actually good? Like, is it the world building? Is it the characters? Is it the sense of achievement at the end?
Yeah.
What do we think?
It was really long and I finished it. Hooray. It might be a tedious answer, but it's the same thing that makes any book. If it's a good book and it's a fantasy book, it's a good fantasy book. If it's got good character building and a believable... When I say believable, I don't mean realistic. I mean well fleshed out world, and you care about the characters. Then, congratulations, good fantasy book. I don't think what makes a good fantasy book is any different to what makes a good noir gumshoe novel a good noir gumshoe novel. It's all about being a good book. I realise that's a really closed answer of like, I don't know, it's a good book, Helen. What do you want from me? And I just push over the microphones and walk away.
It's a valid answer.
Yeah.
But if I play devil's advocate here for a second and ask you the question, Tim, have you ever read a fantasy book where the characters weren't terribly likable and the plot wasn't terribly intriguing, but the magic system kind of, and the way that the magic system was used and the characters' kind of dilemmas... I clearly remember like books where it was like almost an escape room where I was only reading it to find out how this magic system would be utilized in order for the main character to get out of a dilemma.
That's a fair point.
Wow.
That's a fair point because there was, and I might make some enemies, but what was that book? And I think it might be a Lovecrafty-ish horror place, and he's about like an IT guy who's trying to deal with eldritch horror.
Oh, the one about the not washing machines.
The Laundry.
Yes, the laundry. Yes. What is that book series?
It's called the Laundry series.
It is called the Laundry. Oh, there you go. There you go. Sorry, because it is
classic. The Laundry series.
Because I seem to remember, like, I kind of enjoyed them, but I remember being like, it's maybe especially in the first one. I remember being like the main character being like, yeah, okay, you're sort of like a slightly sarcastic foil character for the author to speak through. I don't care. But the actual sort of like, holy crikes, Batman! How are they gonna get out of this jam? In the sense of you've awoken the old gods and they know you're there. I really care about this guy. So you make a very good point, Cole.
Oh, thank you.
What do you reckon, Josh?
So, I mean, I'm kind of on the same page as Tim in terms of like I want it to be a good book, right? And it's got to have engaging characters. It's got to have an engaging plot. But I think what makes a good fantasy book good, as distinct from just any old book, is to do with like creating an engaging and believable world that draws you in. Because to me, what makes fantasy is that sense of this could not happen in our world, right? It has to draw you into that. And I think that's kind of what Cole was maybe getting at, the kind of, can you get drawn into a whole kind of system of magic and become interested in that, even if the rest of the book is not that good? I mean, for me, probably not. I need the book to be a good book as well. But I could definitely see how a really engaging metaphysic can be an important component of a good fantasy book. And if you added something like that to, a piece of mainstream literature, it wouldn't add anything to it because that's not the point.
Yeah.
Right?
Like in the Terry Pratchett books, like and I'm going to use your word because it sounds good, metaphysics of the world. Like the way the world works is anything that's a kind of a satirical reflection. Like the kind of the magic system and the way the world works in the Discworld novels is basically whatever is going to be a good comment on the absurdity of something will be the system by which things work, like the whole narrativium thing, and the fact that you can have a fantasy novel where, like, is it the third book in, is it equal rights? Like, by book 3, it's like, all right, witches and wizards, but what about the integration of male and female education in this world? Like, we're on different topics now. Or the one that's about the banking system, like fantasy novel about the introduction of the postal and banking system into this world. And you're like, yes, I will read this book and it will be great because it's, yeah, as you say, in that kind of very realistic, unreal world.
I mean, Pratchett is particularly good at that, right? And partly because he steals and riffs off real world stuff like the postal system, and he's not just making that stuff up, right? He's basing it on real life stuff. But he is amazingly good at then weaving that into his very detailed and consistent fantasy world, and that's part of his success, is that he's drawn people into and fall in love with a particular world.
Yeah. How do dwarfs and trolls interact with the introduction of the free press? Like, okay, cool, fine. What? Yeah, okay, yeah. God, I love Terry Pratchett so much.
Yeah, he was an excellent writer.
Every time we talk about him, I'm just like, yes!
Excellent, that's the energy we want on this podcast.
Sort of an angry grunt. Books! Books with footnotes!
Exactly. I would say that I think the magic thing is important. I don't subscribe to some discussions I've seen going around where people have said, oh, magic needs to make sense in these ways, or magic needs to have rules, or magic needs X or Y. Like, I fully subscribe to the idea that magic can just be magic and I don't have to understand it to think that it's cool. But it's not really a proper fantasy book if there isn't magic somewhere in it for me.
Oh, that's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a fantasy book that doesn't.
I wonder what everyone's opinion is on soft magic systems versus hard magic systems. Like, do you prefer when a magic system is completely explained to you, or when they have like a hidden rule set that is a little more loose that the author keeps close to the chest, and it's kind of like up to you to kind of paint in the lines and kind of come to your own conclusion as to, like, say, like the Malazan series doesn't exactly explain how any of the magic works. So it would be like a soft magic system. Whereas in like the Lightbringer series, they kind of go in through like, oh, subviolet light, like violet light, oh my gosh, I can't think of the language, but yellow light is very hard and rigid and blue light is more jelly-like. And they go into like how you bend these lights and how they all kind of interact with one another and how they can be interwoven, as opposed to like the Malazan series where it's like, and he swung his sword and thousands perished in a fire because he made this huge tidal wave of death or something like that.
Yeah. I think they kind of serve different purposes, because the soft magic system is like when it's like, look, this isn't the point. The point here isn't discovering the intricacies of how it all... Like, if you're doing a sci-fi book, it doesn't constantly talk about how electricity works, and now I'm immediately going to stop and say, bugger loads of them do, and that's a stupid point. And most sci-fi is about, like, look at this amazing thing. Now get prepared for 15 pages of why it's so damn cool. Right, the core. But do you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's not about the magic. The magic is a means to an end. It's not about it. Go soft magic. If it's like, actually, I want to explore the meaning of this, and often how this magic system is some sort of comment on something, you want to go hard. But yeah, I think they're both...
Isn't that kind of interesting, though? For me personally, whenever I get confronted with a soft magic system or a magic system that doesn't, whatever terminology you want to use, doesn't explain how it is that it works, I spend the entire book looking for clues. So like that unintended consequences, that it becomes more important to me. Whereas in Lightbringer, I don't have to think about, I think it's cool how they utilize it, and then the rules of that system have to stay consistent for how they solve a problem. But then reading something like Malazan or another series where the magic system isn't completely drawn out for me, I spend half the time red stringing it, figuring out if this magic system has a consistent internal logic that's just not being delivered to... I'm playing devil's advocate here. I don't even know if I fully agree with this, but...
You're like, are they using it as a get out of jail free card because they couldn't work out, with magic, and we'd have to worry about it?
Yeah.
But I suppose on the other hand, the magician's trick is if you explain the magic, it's less interesting. It's like for that moment, you're like, oh, okay, that's how it works. But then it's just a thing. Then it's just, nails and screws and pieces of wood. It's not this potentially interesting thing. So if you leave it as a soft magic system, it's a bit more like, well, what do you think it is? And then okay, well, I'll think about it. Whereas a hard magic system, you don't have to think about how it is because you've been told.
Time has run away with me, and we are coming to the end of the episode. So I'd like to hear what your favourite fantasy book or book series is, because I know that fantasy books often come in triplets or quintuplets or decadents. I don't know what you would call 10 of them.
Decadence.
Because mine is The Realm of the Elderlings series by Robin Hobb. And I think there are 18 books in that series.
You think you're done, and then the Ship of Madness is here.
That was what I meant earlier, Tim, when I said I would read a book and cry and then move on to the next one.
They are all very sad. They're like, hey, we've reached the end of the quest, and it didn't help. Next book.
Yeah. Let's give you some more trauma.
Yeah.
Would you like some more of that?
Thanks,
and I'm
Hobbo.
like, yeah, okay, I'll have some more.
Please, sir, another bowl of sadness.
Yes. There was one particular line where, how am I going to set the scene for this? The villain has sort of been defeated, but they're not dead, and the hero is just leaving them there. They're just walking away, and the villain is like, come back and I can, give you all your dreams. But the hero has the corpse of someone who's very close to him, and he says, my dream was dead in my arms, and he walks away and leaves.
Crikey. Enjoy your book. Christ.
It hurts, but it's very good.
Oh, God.
Anyway, other favourite fantasy books, please, go.
Dog Body by Diana Wynne Jones, A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm trying to think of things that'll make me sound smart because everyone in here has such niche picks.
Yeah, you gotta sound smart. If you say The Hobbit, everyone's gonna laugh at you and throw stones.
No, we won't. No, we won't. You don't have to sound like you are smart. You don't have to try and sound smart because you are smart. It's fine.
We love you.
Promise.
Thank you so much. The first King of Shannara was a particularly good book. The first trilogy in the Shannara or Shannara, however you want to say it, series of series was really good. A Wizard of Earthsea really has a special place in my heart. And then I believe the book was called Dog Body, but I read it once and then lost the book, about the constellation Sirius who falls to Earth and then has to kind of learn about life stuck in a dog's body.
Oh, that sounds good.
Those were all really good. Yeah, and then obviously Lord of the Rings, everyone likes that. But I think for me it would probably be most of my favorite fantasy books exist in the YA section of the bookstore, and
it's the best section.
Hate to admit that, but it's so plot driven, so anything plot driven gets me.
No, I'm right there with you. Almost all of my favorite books would go in the YA section.
Right?
It's the best
so
section.
Good. It is.
Sure, Ian McEwan's fine, but get over to that YA section because somebody's parents are dead and they're about to go on a quest.
Exactly.
So what's your favourite then, Tim?
So I've got a couple. I couldn't be pressed for one. Yes. Terry Pratchett's Discworld looms large. It's 45 books. It's just there hovering. It's like the roof of your house. Occasionally it'll leak, but other than that, don't worry about it. And then I really like I think the trilogy. The trilogy is The Gentleman Bastards, but it's The Lies of Locke Lamora is the first book.
Oh, that's good.
Yes, I know that one.
That's good. Yeah, good call.
The Scott Levin books. They are cracking urban fantasy, sort of Italianate. It's like they're in weird fantasy
Florence.
Venice, Florence. Yeah, it's they're a cracking set of books, and I reread them about 3 or 4 times, and it's all about confidence trickster. He's like fantasy confidence trickster heist thing. The first one's about being a confidence trickster and a bandit. The second one's about being is a heist movie. And the third one's a pirate one, I think, or maybe the other way around. But
No, you're right. I think the last one is the pirate one.
It's all good. And then the other one is the Joe Abercrombie books, starting with The First Law, The Blade itself. And again, he writes them at a pace that you wouldn't believe. And they are a little bit it's like good airport fantasy, if that makes sense. They're not vastly complicated, but they're good and they're bleak and the series goes on and on. It's up to the Industrial Revolution kind of setting now, and it's just great. Eat them up all day.
Tim.
I've got yeah.
Tim. Have you read Mark Lawrence?
No, I've not read Mark Lawrence.
You should read Mark Lawrence. If you like Joe Abercrombie, you'll like Mark Lawrence.
Lawrence.
Yeah,
Googling it.
Mark Lawrence. Yeah, Google
American
it.
British novelist, Prince of Thorns, King of Thorns, Red Sister.
Yep.
Noted.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cole.
Real good.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks.
Okay,
Bye,
cool.
bye.
And back to the show.
Keep it in. I demand it.
So, Josh, tell us your favourite.
Well, let me tell you, Tim has really stolen my
I'm
thunder
sorry,
there, because
Josh.
absolutely the two that were at the top of my mind. So I've frantically been looking through my list of all the fantasy books I've ever read, which I obviously did to prepare for this, as you would. And I'm going to pull out some which I really like but wouldn't have made the cut otherwise. So I'm going to thank you, Tim, for giving me the opportunity to do that.
I'm really genuinely sorry. I hate when people do that to me. I thought no one's going to know this Lies of Loch Lamora because I've never heard anyone else talk about it. So
What?
I know.
Very good. Super good.
Such a good book. So I'm going to recommend Throne of the Crescent Moon, which is by Saladin Ahmed, and it's a kind of Islamic fantasy. Now I'm going to potentially have embarrassed myself there by getting that wrong, because I don't know whether it's strictly Islamic or just kind of Islamic themed, if you like. It's got the jinn and it's got sorcerers who do a very different kind of magic, and it's just a really good romp. I think Saladin Ahmed is a comic writer most of the time. Excellent fantasy read there. And I want to mention Marie Brennan's Natural History of Dragons series.
Ooh.
That is a really interesting take on dragons, because it's written from the perspective of a character who is basically a kind of, I can't remember whether it's like more of a paleontologist or a zoologist, maybe kind of a bit of both, of dragons, and going off on fun little sort of Victorian scientist-esque adventures investigating dragons. Really good series, and there's a whole bunch of them. So yeah, the first one stands on its own, but then you can get into more if you like it.
Very good.
Excellent.
I just suddenly thought I can't. But also, I'm just going to say the words out loud. Bartimaeus trilogy, Jonathan Stroud, also
So good.
absolutely amazing.
The gin, so good.
Sassy gin. You want a sassy gin? Come on.
Do you want a sassy gin?
Sassy gin, love.
Do you want a sassy gin? I'm doing a horrible English accent. Can I add one though too as well? I'm getting all excited now because now I'm actually remembering books. The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu.
Ooh, never heard of it.
Yeah, he mentioned the Islamic inspired one, and I just realized that we basically just went for all these like stereotypical like Anglo-Saxon fantasies, but Ken Liu, the Dandelion Dynasty, is like inspired by Chinese culture, and it actually takes place over a myriad of generations and sets in, basically it's about a dynasty and a family as opposed to a single character. In the first book, you go through 3 generations of characters. Amazing.
Right. Okay. We are now over time.
Laurie has made more and more emphatic faces during the recording. Occasionally saying things clearly out loud, but whilst muted. It's good stuff.
Thank you so much for this. This has been such a lovely way to spend an evening. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Listener, thank you for listening along. I hope you have some recommendations now to choose from. I shall see you on the next episode. But for now, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye. And it's goodbye from the rest of them. Do you all want to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Read well,
Bye-bye.
Listener. Read well.
Indeed.
Enthusiasm is a podcast distributed by Rusty Quill and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license. It is directed by Helen Gould, produced by Laurie Ann Davis, with executive producers Alexander J. Newell and April Sumner, and edited by Marissa Ewing, Tessa Broom, and Catherine Ranella. Thanks for listening.